My wife watches me from corners. I moved the mirror. She moved too. I never imagined that 6 years of love, trust, and quiet routines could collapse into fear. I thought marriage was supposed to be the safe zone, the shield from everything outside. But what do you do when the threat doesn't come from outside? What do you do when the threat is your wife, standing half hidden in the hallway at 2 in the morning, watching you with eyes that don't look like hers anymore? We had been together for 6 years, married for 11 months. In all that time, she was normal, ordinary, balanced, kind. She hated horror movies, hated pranks, hated anything that smelled of cruelty. I had always thought that was one of the things that made her stable, predictable, reliable. And yet, here I am, writing this because something shifted. Something small at first. Something I can't laugh off anymore. The first time it happened, I told myself I was tired. It was a weekday, early morning. I was rushing out the door, already late for work. My tie wasn't even knotted right. My mug of coffee was half full, my phone buzzing in my pocket. I moved toward the door, and there she was. Just her eyes and a slip of dark hair peeking from the corner of the hallway wall. She was still, silent, watching me. The shock hit so fast, I spilled hot coffee onto my lip and shirt. I swore, wiped myself, blinked, and she was gone. I heard movement in the living room, the thump of cushions. When I checked, she was on the couch, curled up like she'd been asleep all night. She smiled when I entered, a sleepy, harmless smile, and asked if I was late again. I nodded, kissed her on the forehead, and left. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe she had been sleepwalking. Maybe it was my mind creating something out of shadows because I hadn't slept enough. But the unease followed me the whole day, whispering behind every normal thought. Why was she watching you like that? I tried to bury it. I told no one. We had dinner that night. She asked about my day. We watched some comedy show. She laughed like always. By bedtime, I convinced myself it was over. But it wasn't. 3 nights later, it happened again. I woke up thirsty, stumbled to the kitchen, opened the fridge, pulled out orange juice. As I drank straight from the carton, I felt it. That tightening at the back of my neck. The instinct that says you're not alone. I lowered the carton and turned. She was there again. Only this time, crouched low, peeking from behind the kitchen island, eyes wide. A smile stretching across her face. Not a playful grin. Something else. Too wide, too still. Like a child forcing herself to imitate happiness. I froze. My heart punched against my ribs.
She didn't move, just stared, smiling. I slammed the fridge shut, and the sound broke the moment. She darted away, quick, hands and knees slapping against the hardwood floor as she scuttled into the living room. I stood there, carton dripping juice down my hand, unable to process what I had just seen. When I finally followed, she was lying on the couch again, curled under a blanket, eyes closed, breathing slow, as if she'd been asleep for hours. I stood over her for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall, trying to decide if she was faking. The next morning, I asked casually if she'd gotten up in the night. She shook her head, said she'd slept straight through. I almost told her what I saw, but I swallowed it. Maybe it was better not to give the thought life. Maybe it would die on its own. It didn't. Weeks passed, and the incidents multiplied. Always the same pattern. Corners, shadows, half-hidden glimpses of her face, her eyes, her smile. Watching me. Always watching. Sometimes behind the couch, sometimes behind the curtain. Once, crouched inside her grandmother's old wooden trunk at the foot of our bed, the lid cracked just enough for me to see her eyes glinting in the dark. I only noticed because the hinges squeaked. Every time she disappeared before I could confront her. Every time she ended up somewhere ordinary, reading in bed, scrolling her phone, humming in the kitchen, like nothing had happened. And every time, the dread in me grew heavier. I told myself she was joking, but she wasn't the joking type. She never had been. She hated surprises. She hated pranks. If someone jumped out at her, she'd snap, not laugh. That's who she was. And yet now, she was the one hiding, creeping, smiling from shadows. I told myself maybe it was stress. Maybe something in her mind had cracked. Maybe this was her way of releasing it. I thought about asking her directly, but fear held me back. Fear that she'd deny it. Fear that she'd laugh. Fear that she'd ask me if I was going crazy. Then came the shower.
She had gone to a friend's house, or so she said. I stayed home, sprawled on the couch, lost in some video game. Around 9 at night, I decided to shower. I turned on the hot water, lathered shampoo into my hair, eyes shut against the sting. That's when I felt it. That thick, heavy certainty of being watched. I opened my eyes, and my heart stopped. Her face was pressed against the plastic shower curtain, just her head inside the tub, hair wet, sticking to her skin, the rest of her body outside the curtain, hidden. Her mouth hung open in a grotesque smile, her eyes wide, bloodshot, unblinking. I screamed and stumbled back, knocking shampoo bottles to the floor. She didn't flinch. Water dripped from her hair, streaked her cheeks like black makeup running. She just stared at me, smiling, face pressed close enough to fog the plastic. I scrambled out, slipping, grabbing the towel rail for balance. I shoved the curtain aside, and she was gone. No sound, no trace, just steam and water pounding against tile. I searched the apartment, every room, every closet. Nothing. When she finally returned home an hour later, carrying a bag from the store, she looked at me with confusion when I demanded to know where she had been. She swore she'd just been out, that she hadn't been back since leaving. I didn't sleep that night. The days blurred. Work became impossible. I couldn't focus. Every shadow at home was suspect. Every corner felt alive. I started catching her more often, not less. A glimpse of her face at the end of the hallway, eyes glinting between the banisters of the stairs. The sound of her crawling fast across the floor, disappearing before I could track it. But the worst part wasn't the sightings. It was the feeling that she wanted me to notice. That the watching wasn't an accident, but a ritual. One night, we sat watching Netflix together. I forced a laugh, tried to joke about it, said I hadn't seen her spying on me lately. She looked up from her phone, smiled softly, and said maybe she had just gotten better at it. Then she went back to scrolling. I didn't laugh. For the first time, I wondered if I had ever really known the woman I married.
I told myself that things would calm down, that if I ignored it long enough, if I played the part of the blind husband, the staring from corners would end on its own. But silence didn't bring peace. It only made her bolder. 2 weeks passed without incident, and I let myself hope. She acted normal, laughing at TV shows, making dinner, chatting about errands. I thought maybe it had burned out of her system, some strange phase. But then, one night while I was brushing my teeth, I looked up into the mirror and nearly dropped my toothbrush. She was behind me, half her face peeking from the bathroom doorframe, one eye wide and unblinking, hair spilling forward. No sound, no words, just her face and that same stillness. I spun around so fast I hit my elbow on the sink. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I stood there, breath ragged, foam sliding down my chin. My reflection looked sickly, eyes wide with fear, veins popping at my temples. I didn't want to check the bedroom. I didn't want to see her lying there peacefully, pretending nothing happened. But I forced myself to. And of course, there she was, already under the blanket, turned away from me, breathing slow and steady, like a child in perfect sleep. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, every creak of the house magnified into doom. The pattern returned with a vengeance. I'd catch her watching from impossible places. The crack of a closet door, the shadow under the dining table, once even from behind the washing machine in the laundry room. I couldn't understand how she fit there. And always the smile. That stiff, childlike grin that made her look less like my wife and more like a doll someone had left in the wrong position.
I tried rationalizing. Maybe she was sleepwalking. Maybe some neurological disorder was emerging. Maybe I was losing my mind. So I tested it. One evening, I set up my phone camera in the hallway, angled at the corner where I had seen her most often. I told her I was working late in my home office. Hours passed. The footage recorded. At midnight, I crept back and checked. The video showed nothing. Empty hallway, shadows shifting as cars passed outside. But when I looked closer, frame by frame, my blood froze. At 2:13 a.m., for exactly 4 seconds, the corner darkened. Not movement, just a darker shadow, too symmetrical to be random, like the outline of a head. Then it vanished. I didn't show her the video. I didn't even delete it. I just locked my phone and shoved it deep into a drawer, as if hiding the evidence would make it less real. Work suffered. My boss asked if I was okay. I lied, said I wasn't sleeping well. That was true enough. Colleagues noticed the dark circles, the jittery way I checked over my shoulder whenever someone entered the break room. At home, things fractured further. I started leaving lights on everywhere, but it didn't help. The more illumination, the more shadows seemed to bend, creating new corners for her to watch from. The kitchen became unbearable. Every time I reached for a cabinet or bent down to grab a pan, I expected her face to appear beneath the counter. The shower was worse. I started locking the bathroom door, but the locks felt flimsy, like they could snap under pressure. Sleep became an enemy. Lying in bed, I couldn't relax. I'd feel her eyes on me in the dark. I'd snap my head to the side and swear I caught the outline of her figure at the edge of the room, just out of reach of the lamp's glow. And yet, in the mornings,
She was the same as always. Sweet, caring, making coffee, asking how I slept, as if the night erased everything.
One weekend, I broke. We were sitting on the couch, her legs tucked under a blanket, Netflix droning on. I turned to her and asked if she'd been feeling different lately. She frowned, said no. I pressed further, asked if she remembered waking up at night, if she ever dreamed of moving around the house. She shook her head, looking genuinely puzzled. Then, with a half smile, she asked why. I almost told her, almost confessed that I'd been seeing her in corners, in shadows, watching me like some predator. But something in her expression stopped me. The smile didn't reach her eyes. For a split second, it looked like the grin I'd seen in the dark. I swallowed the words and said I was just tired. She leaned against me, rested her head on my shoulder, whispered that everything would be okay. Her breath was warm against my skin. Too warm. That night, I dreamed, or thought I dreamed, that I woke to find her standing at the foot of the bed. Not peeking this time, not hiding, just standing there, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, staring down at me. I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis, maybe. My chest locked, breath shallow, eyes wide open, but body frozen. She leaned closer, her face descending toward mine. Her smile stretched wider, wider, until it looked like her skin might tear. Then I jolted awake, gasping, drenched in sweat. She was beside me, asleep, her face turned away. But the bedsheet at her side was damp, as if she had just returned. The paranoia seeped into daylight. I started checking behind every door, every curtain, every piece of furniture. My coworkers noticed my exhaustion. One of them joked that I looked like I was being haunted. I laughed along, but inside, the truth was gnawing. Because that's what it felt like. Not a prank, not sleepwalking, a haunting. Only it wasn't a ghost. It was my wife. Then came the attic. I rarely went up there. Just boxes of old clothes, holiday decorations, dust thick enough to choke on. But one afternoon, while she was out shopping, I heard noises, scraping, faint thumps. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the narrow ladder. At first, nothing, just boxes and cobwebs. Then the beam of light swept across the far corner. Her face. Half hidden behind stacked crates, eyes wide, teeth bared in that same impossible grin. I screamed, stumbled back, nearly falling through the hatch. The flashlight clattered from my hand, being spinning wildly across the rafters. When I dared look again, she was gone. I raced downstairs, heart hammering, sweat dripping down my neck. Minutes later, the front door opened. She walked in, carrying grocery bags, humming softly. She looked at me, concerned, asked if I was okay. I told her I'd just had a nightmare. She smiled. Too long, too wide. By then, I couldn't deny it anymore. Something was happening to her, or to me. Either way, the house had become a maze of terror. I dreaded every corner, every turn. The woman I loved was both my comfort and my nightmare. I started sleeping in the car, told her I had late shifts. She seemed unbothered. Too unbothered. But even in the car, parked under a street lamp, I couldn't escape the feeling. I'd wake in the driver's seat at 3 a.m. and swear I saw her face pressed against the window, smiling at me from the glass. Always watching. I tried leaving the house. I thought maybe space would help. I started working late, staying at the office until the janitors closed up. I lingered in coffee shops, libraries, even empty parking lots. But the relief never lasted. Once, in the reflection of a cafe window, I saw her face behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Another time, while walking home, I caught sight of her in the glass of a store display, smiling, crouched low, peeking from behind a mannequin. She was everywhere now, not just corners of the house, corners of my mind. I began documenting notes, timestamps, sketches. I filled a notebook with every incident. I thought proof would help me anchor to reality, but rereading the pages only made me feel insane. Line after line, all describing the same impossible thing. My wife, watching me from places she shouldn't be, smiling when she shouldn't smile. One night, I left the notebook open on the counter. The next morning, it was gone. I asked her casually if she'd seen it. She shook her head, said she hadn't touched my stuff. Later that evening, I found it under my pillow. A single new line written at the bottom of the last page, in handwriting that looked like mine, but wasn't. I like when you notice. I burned the notebook in the sink. At this point, reality and hallucination blurred so much that I didn't know which was worse. Believing she was truly doing these things, or believing I was going mad. I called my sister once, nearly confessed everything, but what would I even say? My wife hides in corners and watches me crawl around the house at night? It sounded ridiculous, like a creepypasta. Instead, I told her I was stressed at work. She told me to take a vacation. I almost laughed. Vacation? From what? From my own house? From my own wife? The next escalation happened at dawn. I was half asleep, drifting in and out, when I felt pressure on my chest. I opened my eyes. She was sitting on top of me, knees pinning my arms, face inches from mine. Her eyes were wide, pupils blown, and she was smiling, lips stretched so far it looked painful. She leaned close, her nose almost touching mine. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I tried to scream, but only a choked sound came out.
I used to think paranoia was just a word for people who watch too many horror movies. Now it was my default state. I lived in suspicion, scanning corners before stepping into rooms, checking mirrors twice before trusting my own reflection. And still, she was always there. The sightings grew more intense. One night I caught her crouched at the far end of the hallway, knees bent, palms flat on the floor, head tilted. She didn't move. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and she was gone. When I walked to the bedroom, she lay under the blanket, turned away, breathing evenly. Another night I woke to the sound of scratching, faint, rhythmic, like nails dragging along wood. I grabbed my phone, its screen the only light, and followed the sound to the kitchen. She was inside the pantry, door half shut, crouched among cereal boxes and flour bags, one hand slowly scratching at the wall. When I gasped, the door slammed shut by itself. I yanked it open, heart hammering, and found nothing but groceries. By then, I stopped asking her questions. She'd only look at me with confusion when I hinted at anything strange. She'd laugh softly, like I'd told a bad joke, and brush it off. Sometimes she'd even tease, asking why I was so jumpy, why I looked at her like I expected her to bite me. She wasn't wrong. Sleep offered no relief. The dreams were worse. I dreamed of waking to see her standing on the dresser, crouched low, smiling down at me from above. I dreamed of her crawling across the ceiling, head twisting unnaturally as she stared. I dreamed of her face filling every window of the house, dozens of her appearing in, watching from every angle. And the worst part was waking and not knowing if the dreams had truly ended. Because sometimes I'd wake, heart racing, and see her standing by the bed, silent, watching. And when I blinked, she'd be gone. Or lying beside me, breathing steadily as if she'd never moved.
Then I blinked, and she was gone. I sat up gasping, clutching my chest. She lay beside me, turned away, breathing slow and steady. I didn't sleep again. By then, I started avoiding her. Not consciously, just instinctively. Sitting farther on the couch, eating at different times, pretending to be busy. She noticed. She asked if I was mad at her. I said no. She frowned, then smiled, and that smile looked too familiar. One night she climbed into bed beside me, wrapped her arms around me, and whispered that she loved me. Her voice was normal, gentle, but I felt her lips curl wider against my ear, stretching into that grin I now dreaded. I lay stiff as wood until she fell asleep. The final straw came in the basement. I rarely went down there, just storage and an old boiler. But one evening I heard humming, low, tuneless, drifting up the stairs. I grabbed a flashlight and descended slowly. The beam swept across shelves, boxes, pipes, then landed on her. She was crouched in the far corner, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around them. Her head tilted back, eyes fixed on me, mouth stretched wide. The humming came from her throat, a steady vibration that made the hair on my arms rise. I dropped the flashlight. The beam spun, shadows lunging across the walls. When I picked it up again, the corner was empty. I ran upstairs, locked the basement door, and sat against it until dawn. At this point, I know what you're thinking. Leave. Walk away. Get out of the house. File papers. Run. And I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But every time I considered it, something inside me froze. It wasn't just fear of her, it was fear of myself. What if I was imagining all of it? What if I told someone and they laughed, or worse, had me committed? I couldn't risk it, so I stayed. But staying meant surrendering. Every night, every shadow, every corner belonged to her. And each day the line between my wife and the thing that watched me grew thinner.
I don't know if this ends in madness or death, but I know one thing. There are no safe corners anymore. Not in this house, not in my mind. I had convinced myself that I could survive it if I just kept moving, if I ignored the shadows, if I avoided the corners, if I kept every light in the house burning until the bulbs gave out. But the truth caught me anyway. You can't outwalk someone who lives in your house. You can't outrun someone who sleeps beside you. By the time spring came, I was hollow. I ate in silence, barely tasting food. I went to work with bloodshot eyes, mumbled through meetings, forgot what day it was. People thought I was drinking again, but I wasn't. I was dry, brittle, clear as glass, and just as fragile. Every evening I came home, I braced myself, and she never disappointed. I'd find her crouched behind the curtain when I opened the living room door. I'd find her face pressed against the frosted glass of the shower when I rinsed shampoo from my hair. I'd wake at night to see her leaning over me, wide grin splitting her cheeks, only to vanish when I blinked. The cruel part was the mornings, because in daylight she was herself again, sweet, calm, normal, asking if I wanted toast, reminding me to pay bills, suggesting we plant flowers out front now that the frost had ended. And I'd nod, smile weakly, and pretend I didn't see the faint trace of that grin lingering on her lips. It all came to a head in late April. I was shaving,
The mirror fogged from the shower. When I wiped it clean and saw her face not behind me, but inside the mirror itself, like she wasn't in the room at all, only in the glass. Her eyes locked on mine, wide and gleaming, her mouth twisting into that impossible smile. I dropped the razor, cut my cheek, stumbled back. When I dared look again, the reflection was normal. Just her, standing in the doorway, looking concerned, asking if I was okay. I didn't answer. I pushed past her, blood dripping down my chin, and locked myself in the bedroom. I could hear her knocking, voice soft and worried, but I didn't open the door.
That night, I slept in the closet, curled against winter coats, door cracked, just enough for air. It wasn't comfort, but it was a cage, and cages sometimes feel like safety. The next week, I finally broke enough to call a doctor. I didn't tell them everything, just that I wasn't sleeping, that I was seeing things. They gave me pills. I swallowed them desperately, hoping to dissolve the terror in a fog of chemicals. For a few nights, it seemed to help. I slept through until dawn. No sightings, no grins in the dark. I almost believed it was over. Then, on the fourth night, I woke to find the pills scattered across the floor. The bottle on the dresser was empty, and she was crouched at the foot of the bed, holding one tablet between her teeth, smiling as it dissolved on her tongue. I screamed. She laughed, a sound I had never heard from her before. Low, guttural, alien. Then she crawled out of the room on all fours, disappearing into the hallway shadows. When I checked the next morning, the bottle was back on the dresser, half full. She was in the kitchen, humming while she made pancakes. She asked if I had slept well. I told her yes. By now, I was living minute to minute. I stopped planning anything longer than a day. Work became background noise. Friends gave up inviting me places. My sister called less often. The house consumed everything. One night, desperate, I set up cameras. Every corner of the bedroom, hallway, kitchen. I left them running, red lights blinking like tiny warnings. She didn't mention them. She acted like they weren't there. The next morning, I checked the footage. Every camera showed static from exactly midnight until 3 a.m., perfect static. Then, clear again, as if nothing had happened. I smashed the cameras.
The basement became the heart of my dread. I started hearing noises from there every night, scraping, humming, soft laughter. I locked the door, pushed furniture against it, but the noises continued, vibrating up through the floorboards. Finally, I couldn't take it. I grabbed a flashlight, a kitchen knife, and forced myself down the stairs. The air was damp, colder than it should have been. The light swung across boxes, pipes, shadows, and then I saw her. Dozens of her. Not physically. Reflections. In every shiny surface. The boiler's metal, the glass jars on shelves, even the damp sheen of the floor. Her face, multiplied, everyone smiling, everyone watching. I screamed and bolted up the stairs, slamming the door, locking it, shoving the table back against it. I didn't sleep that night or the next. By May, I was unraveling. I started hallucinating her outside the house too. Faces in car windows as I drove, reflections in shop front glass, even in photographs on my phone. Her grin stretched wider than when I remembered taking them. I thought about leaving, packing a bag, disappearing. But every time I imagined it, a whisper echoed in my head.
You can't leave what's inside you. I didn't know if it was her whisper or mine. The last clear memory I have is this. I was sitting in the living room, lights blazing, TV muted. She walked in, wearing her nightgown, and crouched behind the armchair across from me. Not fully hiding, just half visible, watching. I asked her why. My voice cracked, but I asked anyway. She smiled, wider than ever, and for the first time, she answered. Because you always notice. That's all she said. Then she crawled toward me on hands and knees, slow and steady, grin splitting her face. I don't remember what happened after that. Now when I wake, I'm never sure where I am. Sometimes it's the couch, sometimes the bed, sometimes the floor of the closet. She's always there, though. Always in a corner, always smiling, always watching. And maybe the worst part is this. I don't want to stop noticing anymore. Because if I stop, if I pretend she isn't there, I think she'll come closer. So I keep noticing. I keep writing. I keep waiting. And I keep asking myself one question every night before I close my eyes. If the woman in the corners isn't my wife, then who have I been living with all this time?